Hello, my name is Kenneth Johnson, and I get to talk about my father today, which is one of those subjects that has had it brings up a lot of emotions for me over the years. And interestingly enough, being that this Father's Day is coming up, of course, there's always that issue of what do I get my father for Father's Day? And my father is one of those guys. He's got every tool you can imagine. He doesn't really need any more T-shirts to say, number one dad or any of that stuff. So I decided this year that I would write him a letter and sharing in that letter all that he means, has been to me. So it was really a very special opportunity to kind of really reflect on our relationship. And I began the letter by saying very clearly that, I feel very blessed. I've never known what it's like not to have a father. I've never known what it's like to not be able to reach him in a moment's notice when I need to talk to him. So I appreciate just his presence, his consistency in my life from my earliest memory. There were some pictures I put in the letter as well. One of them, I'm like 6 months old. It's my first trip to the zoo, and he's holding me there in front of the cage. I don't know if there were lions or what was in the cage, but it was one of those moments of like, from the beginning. My mother says when we came home from the hospital, he was the one taking care of me at the outset, and that's what he's always done. He's always been the one to take care of me, to look after me. Get me up in the morning, give me breakfast, get me to school. See that if I had a thing going on at school, he would be the one to show up in the middle of the day to be there for the assembly to see me do the dance at St. Patrick's Day or whatever the occasion was. And he was the one who was my first teacher and probably the longest term teacher I've had in my life. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about something that he's taught me how to do. Whether it's when I get in the car and crank it up, I listen to the engine the way he taught me to listen to the engine. I look under my car. I look in the driveway when I pull the car out. Because those are the little things that he taught me to do. That he said, that's how you take care of a car. And I think about it when cutting the grass. He taught me how to cut the grass. Because when I was 7 years old, he would cut the grass and save like the last 2 rows for me to cut. And then over time, he saved me more rows. Until by the time I was 10, I was cutting the whole yard. But that's how I learned. And those were those moments where, from his standpoint, those were the skills that he felt it was his duty to teach me as a father, raising a son. And he was very good about doing those things. Everything he did, he showed me. Everywhere he went, it wasn't like there were places that it's like, oh, you can't go, you stay home today. No, I was there right along with him. And I think back on those times and think, gosh, somehow that had to have been a drag because I was probably slightly precocious as a child and probably ran my mouth probably a little too much. I'm sure there were times when he didn't necessarily want to hear everything I was chattering about, and yet and still I can't recall him telling me to shut up or, just can you find something else to talk about, Of course, because we spent so much time together, I learned to read him pretty well too, and I knew when to talk and when not to talk. We kind of have that understanding as well. And he always says that I'm always his best helper whenever he's working on something because, we get into a rhythm where it's almost like we're reading each other's minds, that I can hand him the tool before he asks for the tool, or I'm thinking ahead of him or he's thinking ahead of me, and we can, even to this day, we can be working on something and have those moments. I really do feel very blessed in that regard. And I feel particularly blessed because he himself did not have a particularly terrific role model as a father. His father was a tyrant who was abusive in many ways and didn't have the means to really support a family. So, he wasn't what you would think of as the ideal role model, but probably not a whole lot different than every other black man in the 40s and 50s raising kids in Greenville, Alabama at the time. He was just trying to make sure everybody got fed as best he could. Wasn't really concerned too much about anyone's feelings. But my father has learned a lot and developed a lot. But I can't say all that and say that every day was rosy either. I mean, it wasn't Ozzie and Harriet or Father Knows Best, where I'd come skipping in from the day of school and, you know, he'd have some peanut butter and jelly and a glass of milk and want to hear all about my day, and we'd sit there and, you know, chat. You know, he wasn't that kind of dad either. You know, he was a realist. He knew that there were certain things he had to teach me and get me to learn, and there were certain lessons I needed to absorb in life to be able to sustain myself. You know, I think from his standpoint, clearly teaching me life skills, being able to be independent, and teaching me also the importance of school and education, because that was something that he didn't get to explore himself. So he understood that it was something really important that he needed to instill in me. So, I mean, I remember in 3rd grade bringing home a math test or something, and I don't know what, I got something wrong on it, and, you know, he wanted me to go over the test, and I'm like, I've got the grade. It's okay. I don't need to go back over it now. And he's like, no, you need to go back over it right now. You know, and he stood there with a belt and made sure I went back over it right then and right there to understand and get to know those questions and those answers. So those were definitely things that stick out, as well as those moments where his desire to instill in me certain skills felt a bit overbearing at times. And then, of course, as he realized that he had a gay son, he wasn't, you know, skipping along to the parade of trying to join PFLAG either. You know, he definitely struggled a lot with that, and I felt the brunt of his struggles in that sense of some of the language that he used was not the most affirming in the sense of what I wanted to hear as a gay kid coming up. And I'll often think about how, you know, as kids, you know, I grew up in an all-white school, all-white environment. Someone called me a nigger at school, and I came home. You know, my parents would speak to their ignorance and explain to me that there are some people who are like that. And, you know, we don't have to dwell in their ignorance, but we just have to rise above it. But when you're sitting at your kitchen table over dinner and your father calls you a sissy, then there is no refuge. And those words sting even more than the ignorant white kid down the street. So we had a lot of healing and work to do around getting beyond those hurtful words. And I really do believe as an adult now that we have come into a place where we have kind of resolved a lot of that stuff through some therapy, you know, collectively and individually, through some really hard conversations with the three of us, because I am an only child. It's just me, my father, and mother. But we did have to work through a lot. And I'm glad we did. I can't imagine not having him in my life and not having him at a moment's notice to be able to call him, to ask him a question, or nowadays he calls me and asks me a question, particularly if it's got something to do with his computer. So you know, it's great to have that opportunity to share with him things that I now know, and for him to seek my counsel in certain topics, and yet he's still the expert. So we give him that respect as the one that has the final say. He is the head of the family. So that's my dad and my relationship with him.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. That was very touching.
Yeah.
I don't think, like, I didn't grow up with a father, and for the longest time I never really wanted one. I think that was probably the first time that I can recall that I was like, wow, you know, I was actually missing out on something, about, you know, not having a father, because I just never felt a lack of anything. But that was very inspiring. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Kenneth.
What's your father's name?
His name is Alvin Johnson.
Thanks, Alvin Johnson. You are magnificent.